Testosterone. It's what makes you a man. It's what gives you strength, what helps you dominate everything you touch. But what if I told you that high-level brain function is utterly dependent on having high levels of testosterone? That is the topic of this video. Strap in.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ryan, and this is the Thunder Channel on nootropics, on testosterone, on performing well because life is much better and you can achieve more of your goals when you function well. I am your host, Ryan Michael Balla. Thanks for being with me. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Hit the bell to get notified of all the content I'm pushing out. If you get the YouTube app, it'll notify you in real time of live streams and new videos. A couple products support this broadcast. I'll explain them later, but super quickly as an introductory. Number one, the Cortex stack. Motivation, mental energy, verbal fluency. This is a nootropic stack. It's mine. I built it in 2015. Down in the description below. Secondarily, the Torque stack. 6 to 8 hours of fire blood and stimulant energy down in the description or at livecortex.com. And again, I'll explain those stacks later. All right, friends, let's talk about perhaps one of the most important topics I think that I can be addressing here because it has to do with depression and anxiety and general male well-being, and that is testosterone and how testosterone, first of all, is a nootropic considering its effect on neurotransmitters, which we're going to get to, but just how profoundly it can change a person's life, a guy's life, when their test is low and then they work to raise their testosterone. It's actually pretty profound. I'm going to get to some Reddit anecdotes of people that, going on TRT absolutely changed their lives. Now, this isn't a video promoting TRT. It's promoting the idea that you should have adequate levels of testosterone. And if you're deficient in any way, you need to be working ASAP, like be running to work on raising your testosterone. Okay, now there are a couple of known things that we know that testosterone in general, high levels of testosterone, whether it's TRT or you're working on naturally raising your testosterone, do, and I want to explain a couple of them. First comes from a paper titled Testosterone Treatment Enhances Regional Brain Perfusion in Hypogonadal Men. So these are men that are below 290, I think is the reference range or the measurement, nanograms per deciliter total test. That's deficient. That's hypogonadal. I'd imagine men in that case have all sorts of problems related to testosterone. Now, what they conclude in this paper is that testosterone increases regional brain perfusion, cerebral perfusion. Cerebral perfusion is the brain's propensity to uptake blood into tissues of the brain. That's really, really important, right? For enhanced blood flow in certain regions of your brain and a higher propensity to do that under the presence of higher levels of testosterone. So you want more brain blood flow, which is going to equal better cognitive function. Make sure your testosterone levels are adequate. Conclusion of that paper is the results of this study provide objective evidence that testosterone and or its metabolites increase cerebral perfusion in addition to the improvement in cognitive function. Couldn't be any more cut and dry than that. But look, there are important other cascades in terms of neurotransmitters that are important to understand why testosterone has such a beneficial effect on performance, focus, energy. Like most guys that raise their test from low test or go on TRT from having low test are like, wow, I focus better, I have more confidence, I have a lot more energy. I feel like I want to conquer shit in life. And there's a reason for that. There's many reasons. So one of the reasons is that your testosterone will convert, some of it is going to aromatize via these aromatase enzymes, which are everywhere throughout your body, largely in adipose tissue, into estrogen. Now, most people think estrogen is a bad thing for a guy to have. Well, too high, then definitely, right? But there's a certain level that's sort of a sweet spot for men because there's documented evidence as well as many anecdotes that if you go too low on serum estradiol, you can run into other problems. Estrogen, one of the good things about, again, some estrogen, not a ton of estrogen for a guy, but one of the good things about adequate levels of estrogen is estrogen sensitizes neurotransmitter receptor sites, okay, including serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So you've literally got better responsiveness on the receptor side to those neurotransmitters. Serotonin binds better to serotonin receptors. Dopamine binds better to dopamine receptors. Norepinephrine binds better. If these neurotransmitters are just sort of floating around and not able to effectively bind and cause an activation of the receptor site, it doesn't really matter if they're there. I mean, they're going to get cleared. Who knows what's ultimately going to happen? Depends on the transporters. But having them around isn't, going to solve problems. Having them binding to receptor sites adequately is going to give you more energy. It's going to stabilize your mood. It's going to give you more drive and motivation. This is in part why having high levels of testosterone, it's because of the estrogen, gives you such cognitive benefits and is like, using a nootropic. Shortly after raising testosterone, you have a better response to all of your, to 3 primary neurotransmitters and probably more. I mean, who knows? There may be a better response to acetylcholine and glutamate, and maybe GABA. I don't know there's any literature behind that, but it's not far-fetched to think that it could happen. There's a report titled, High-Dose Testosterone Treatment Reduces Monoamine Oxidase A Levels in the Human Brain, a preliminary report, in which basically they describe what the title says. We don't really need to go into it, except for to say that monoamine oxidase A works to clear neurotransmitters from the synapse, right, from your brain, to prevent them from binding to receptors and activating them. So what that ultimately means is less neurotransmitters around to bind to receptors. However, testosterone, in this case, testosterone treatment, TRT, and a lot of these are essentially TRT, but again, you can achieve this with raising your levels of testosterone, reducing monoamine oxidase A. And in the reduction of monoamine oxidase A, you then have more neurotransmitter around to bind to receptor sites. So it's like, you're going to have more dopamine around, more acetylcholine around, probably more serotonin around, potentially more norepinephrine and epinephrine around. Another study found that castrated male rats showed no interest in sex. Not very surprising because they're castrated. However, and dopamine was not released in the MPOA, again, the medial preoptic area, an area that is very responsible for sexual interest when it comes to males and male rats. After testosterone injections, the castrated rats engaged in sexual intercourse. There was also an increase in dopamine in the MPOA, the medial preoptic area. So what does that tell us? You took castrated rats that weren't firing dopamine in the MPOA, in a critical region for interest in sex, and they didn't want to engage in sexual activity. Then you injected them with testosterone, and suddenly that area that's supposed to have dopamine that engages them in sex had dopamine release, and then they engaged in sexual intercourse. Like, pretty amazing stuff, which tells us that testosterone directly is affecting the concentrations of dopamine. And it's regional in the brain, right? There's probably more areas than the MPOA. But that's a pretty critical identification to understand about how testosterone improves drive, focus, motivation, and then also like the inclination to engage in sexual activity. This is perhaps, so that's a good degree of the literature, and there's more out there, and I would encourage you, if you are dealing with depression or anxiety, obviously lack of libido, to go and research further on this. But I think what's really powerful is looking at the anecdotals. Now, look, I want to make a quick statement, I guess a disclosure. I don't know how to say it. I'm not saying that TRT or testosterone is going to cure your depression. I'm not saying that, or anxiety. I'm saying more than likely it will help, and I want to give you some Reddit anecdotes, and let's just look at their experience. That's all we want to do here. Check this out. On a thread titled, Has Testosterone Helped Anyone with Their Depression? Okay. This is the responses from some users. A user says, I would say testosterone pretty much cured my depression. Although my depression had a lot to do with my fucked up puberty and the bullying I experienced because of it, as well as my own feelings of inadequacy as a man. I was raised in a pretty traditional conservative environment, and I always felt inadequate compared to other guys. I overcompensated for those feelings by acting tough, not allowing myself to feel emotions, and overworking myself. That just pushed me deeper into my cycle of depression. I feel a lot better nowadays, thanks to testosterone's effects. I'm more energetic, I've reconnected with my hobbies, and just look healthier. Okay, that's sort of a mild, good anecdote for testosterone, so let's move on to something more intense. Another user states, hell yes, it's been nice to be optimal, energy and drive back, require less sleeping in on off days, and no more bouts of depression. My total T was in the 500s and now 1,000 plus. I think the critical takeaway from that anecdote is no more bouts of depression, right? Energy and drive back, no more bouts of depression. Another user states, yes, TRT absolutely crushed my depression and anxiety. So happy it did. I even did ketamine injections to help with the depression, and it wasn't until I read up on symptoms of low T and started therapy that I was finally back to my old self and what I wanted to be. So yeah, long story short, it has been a game changer for me. Best of luck to you all. So what did that user say? He said that, yeah, he had a bunch of anxiety, depression, tried ketamine, didn't significantly help, looked into the negative effects of low T, got on testosterone treatment, and then significantly reduced or removed his depression and anxiety. Yet another user goes, yes, it helped me greatly. I had an accident a while ago where I was forced to stay at home for months that resulted in me getting really depressed. I looked up online why would that be the case and found out maybe low testosterone would be the reason. At first I dismissed it since I'm a really fit guy and have a really healthy diet, but then I decided to test my T levels just to confirm. Important takeaway, you may think you have, it's like you don't know where your test is unless you're looking. You can't be looking blind in this thing, and anything related to physiology, you got to look at the labs. And decided to start TRT, and it honestly changed my life. It completely eradicated my depression. Also, it helped a lot with anxiety. I had anxiety most of my entire life and started taking notice about 3 years ago, but didn't know what to do. Now I can easily talk to people without overthinking like before. I even made a video about my experience with TRT on YouTube. Before TRT, my anxiety would have stopped me from talking to a camera. I would just overthink everything. So that's a couple really, really great anecdotes, and there are plenty more out there. Now, a lot of these, again, are raising testosterone via TRT. But in my work with client work and naturally raising people's testosterone, not that I won't suggest TRT if it absolutely needs to happen or if a person wants to experiment with, totally fine. My clients say they feel better, right? Their anxiety is significantly reduced or gone. Their depression is significantly reduced or gone. They feel more energized. They're a lot more focused. They want to conquer stuff. So something very, very powerful is going on when a guy with non-adequate levels of testosterone gets his levels attached to adequate levels. Now, there's stuff that we know, right? Increasing dopamine regionally in certain areas of the brain, increasing cerebral perfusion, that is tissue uptake of blood and probably oxygen. Estrogen sensitizing neurotransmitter receptor sites, man. How powerful is that? Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine receptors, better responsiveness to their ligands, those neurotransmitters, as well as monoamine oxidase A reduction from testosterone treatment. So then you just have more of all of the neurotransmitters in general because monoamine oxidase A isn't clearing them at large capacities. I can tell you this, every single time, and I sort of, intuitively know when this is happening, that my test gets below a certain threshold, I do not feel as good. I don't have as much energy. I don't have as much drive to kill it. Like that monster, beast drive to just crush everything and do content and just be an animal in terms of productivity. I've got other businesses that I focus my time on. My test is high. I just want to focus on that stuff all day. I rarely take breaks. I don't take fucking vacations these days. I'm working a lot because my test is in a good place. But when it isn't, when it drops below, somewhat recently, it dropped below 770, right around 770. After I did an HCG, then a Clomid cycle. And I wanted to see where it would bottom out to. And it bottomed out at 770. And though I was still productive, I didn't feel as good. Thereafter, getting it back up to a level that I found is good for me, which is 900, 950, felt fucking amazing. Much more alert, energized, motivated, focused. Just remarkable. I would say, just to nail this home and solidify what I've been saying is, look, I work with a lot of clients that are on TRT. And normally they're functioning really awesomely, but for one reason or another, their doc tells them to lower the dose. They've read on Reddit somewhere that their estrogen is too high, and so as a result of that, they're lowering the dose. They may have some acne from their TRT treatment, and so they're lowering the dose. And almost inevitably, invariably, what happens when people lower their dose is for about a week's time, they feel the same. They largely feel fine. And then they have a pretty abrupt crash where some of them actually explain to me that they're depressed. They're actually depressed. They don't want to do anything. They're laying in bed watching movies. They're not engaged in work. They're not engaged in life. They're just sort of they fell off a cliff. Why does that happen? Because the neurotransmitter effects from testosterone, they stick around when you lower your dose or your testosterone starts to lower for a certain period of time. Call it 3, 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, maybe 2 weeks. Who knows? It's different for different people and how they're metabolizing neurotransmitters and how they eat and whatever. But then eventually this falls off of a cliff, right? There's less estrogen to sensitize a neurotransmitter receptor sites. There's less dopamine. You may have monoamine oxidase A kicking back into gear, which is clearing more neurotransmitters. So if you're used to a certain quantity of neurotransmitters and a certain function of neurotransmitters, and then it markedly reduces, yeah, you're going to feel far worse than you usually feel or than you typically feel or used to feel. Okay? This happens all the time. And then it's like, I mean, who knows what ends up happening? Maybe the reduction in testosterone was necessary for one reason or another. So obviously something very, very powerful is happening when your testosterone levels are adequate. Okay, so if you're struggling with, I wouldn't call it depression just because, you know, for YouTube purposes or whatever, fucking Christ, I can't even say what I need to say sometimes on this channel, which sucks. But I would say, you know, like if you're struggling with motivation, focus, you haven't looked at testosterone, you know, you're not particularly happy, you're kind of like depressive, right? I'm not saying NPD, but, you know, you're feeling that way. And you haven't looked at your testosterone numbers, look at them. You know, there's a good chance your numbers are lower than where they should be. Even if they're sitting at 500, you're probably going to feel better when they're at 750. And you probably even feel better than that where they're at 950, right? Then you start to raise your test after that. And for a lot of people, you're going to feel a lot better. You're going to function a lot better. Testosterone, my friends, having adequate levels of it is not only really important, but it is critical. It is critical for your function as a man. It's critical for your brain function. It's critical for your productivity. It's obviously critical for your sex life. It's critical for your cognitive ability. It's critical for neurotransmitter quantity, availability, obviously receptor function. It is extremely necessary for you to have adequate levels of testosterone. Do not overlook it. Don't brush it by the wayside. And don't not test. You need to know where your test is. Because, my friends, having adequate levels of testosterone is a nootropic. Appreciate you being with me. Thank you so much for watching. As I explained earlier, there are a couple products that support this broadcast, but they're epic nootropic products that work to make you feel, perform, and function awesomely. Number one, the Cortex stack. 9 years on the market tested, almost 100,000 bottles sold. Motivation, mental energy, verbal fluency. Buy the Cortex nootropic stack, livecortex.com. The link is literally in the description on this video. Go buy a bottle, buy 2. You will love it. Secondarily, the Torque stack. Can't even begin to say how many good things people are saying about Torque. Since we launched it, it's blown up. The most purchased stack on the internet. Look, people want a readily available, easy 2 capsules to take to give them clean stimulation, energy, motivation, drive, focus, the will to work, like a positive mood. People want to feel good. That's what Torque delivers. 6 to 8 hours is the typical effect duration window. You can buy the Torque nootropic stack down in the description below, or at livecortex.com. Again, my second brainchild. I love that stack. I take it a lot, and a lot of people do as well. Lastly, if you'd like to work with me on either designating, identifying, formulating, and then building an effective rotation schedule around a series of nootropic stacks that are highly targeted to your brain, because it's going to be different for different people. If you have an energy problem, you need that resolved. If you have an otherwise brain chemistry issue and you need that resolved. If you have a testosterone issue that's contributing and you need that resolved, really all of that is encompassed in what I do in consulting. If you're a business person, an athlete, an actor, an entrepreneur, a corporate person that needs to function better, there's something going on that you need to get to the bottom of, that is my expertise. Hire me, livecortex.com. I promise you, you won't regret hiring me. You know, my entire job is making you feel, perform, and function awesomely. And the stakes are high. I put a lot of effort into it, and a lot of weight is carried on each individual's ability to get better and function good. It is what I live for. Hire me, livecortex.com. Thank you so much for being with me. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you. Look at your testosterone, my friends, because test is a nootropic. And without it at adequate levels, you're just not going to feel as good. Okay? Thanks for being with me.